our speakers. We're going to welcome Juli Lassow with JHL Solutions. And Julie's presentation, Deepening Suppliers' Relationships in the Age of Retail Disruption. So she's going to give us a good look on how we can build vital and meaningful supplier relationships. Juli.
Thank you, Robin.
Switch the water up there too.
Oh, not a problem.
Too quick.
And there I am. I'm going to start out with a confession today. I love retail. I'm out in the stores, I'm shopping online, I read the news, I listen to the podcasts, and I attend events like these. And when I hear of the latest and greatest retail technologies out there that are impacting this space, my inevitable first questions are always, what, where, and how are we going to use that technology to make and ship product? So for those of you that had a moment to read the card, my background in retail is mostly growing up in the Target organization. And about half the time I spent there was with retail supplier partners. And I found that the answers to these questions and really other fantastic dialogue came in partnership with my strongest retail sourcing supplier partners. Now, what I have noticed recently is that there's increasing tension on those partnerships between retailers and their strongest suppliers. And I think that's an incredibly important topic to be concerned about, and it's what I want to talk to you about today. Because I think reversing that trend is key to not only surviving, but thriving in a time of incredible retail disruption. But let's start with the trends. First, we have our retailers, who I see is increasingly focused on understanding their consumer, and rightly so. The technologies, the analysis, to understand what's driving consumer behavior and how to develop their products. On the other side, we have our suppliers, who are increasingly focused on driving efficiency, reducing costs, navigating challenges such as country of production challenges. Worthy and noble pursuits on both sides, but as both of these groups really dig in and focus on their own technologies, their own innovations, they spend less time together, collaborating, and thinking about ways to build stronger businesses that are more innovative and that will help them both grow their businesses long term. I believe that's a trend worth reversing. My proposition is this. In an age of retail disruption, the way to truly thrive is to deepen your partnerships with your supplier partners, both products and services, to really build innovation and grow your businesses together. So today I'll take you through two critical disruptors that I see, and certainly there are many more, but two disruptors that I see that are really putting a lot of tension on the partnerships. But specifically how there's technology and tools that are evolving today that can really help take these challenges and turn them up into opportunities to thrive, as well as some discussion frameworks to help deepen the conversation that you're having with your supplier partners. First, so I felt like I'd be a little disingenuous today if I got up on this retail stage and talked about tension between suppliers and retailers, and I didn't touch on trade policy. So I know there's a variety of retail businesses and the ecosystems that support retail businesses in the room today. But if you'll humor me, raise your hand if you import or indirectly import goods today. Okay, keep your hand up if you import those goods from China. So for those of you that raised your hand, how much has your approach changed in the last year? Or even the last month or week? So even if that's not your specific position, I imagine that you can have some empathy for those of us that are navigating that space every day. And when I thought about what I would get up and say on this stage today, I found that I was doing draft after draft of this presentation, to be quite honest, with it changing every week, every day, even tweet to tweet some days, on really where the key position was. So I really set aside the idea of what are the list of to-dos when it comes to navigating a relationship between the US and China specifically, and really wanted to think more about a mindset. How can you approach this shift or other shifts that you're looking at within your business in a more proactive and collaborative way? China. For much of retail, production starts in China. There are certainly exceptions with this industry, by industry, but China plus maybe one backup. In the retail nomenclature, it's China plus one. And this is certainly a strategy I practiced when I sourced a lot of the goods out of hard goods for Target. And if you produce in China or import from China, you're in good company. Last year, the United States imported more than $500 billion of consumer goods or components out of China. As of last summer, 80% of those importers were actively either looking to shift to a new country of production or had already moved. So when you think of that, hundreds of billions of dollars shifting that quickly to nations such as Vietnam, India, countries in Africa, it's pretty clear that the China Plus One strategy is not going to be a strategic approach for retail anymore. And it's hard to know how the trade policies will continue to impact the partnerships between the US and China specifically, but it's pretty clear that China is becoming less and less important to some industries, with some industries making the shift altogether. Apparel, for the first time this year, is producing a majority of their products outside of China, and other industries are following that trend. So what are some of the ways that you can navigate a shift as gigantic as this? And based on the topic that I led this conversation with, you're probably not surprised to notice that I think that a way to do this really effectively is obviously partnering very closely with your nearest supplier partners and covering the basics, certainly where production is today, but also what are the creative ways that you're looking to stay or go? Now, the retailers that I see that are struggling the most with this conversation are the ones that basically tell their supplier partners, come back to me with a plan. I know I don't want to be in China. I'm concerned about that. I don't want to take the tariff impact. Just come back to me with a plan. And I think that's a mistake, because I think the value is in the conversation and understanding why you're in China in the first place, what the full benefits are, and then being able to compare and contrast that to wherever you may end up moving to, and opening up that dialogue, not fully outsourcing it, fully shifting it out of the dialogue you're having with them. And also understanding what the full cost of that shift is, not just the cost of goods, but all of the benefits and the impacts of the full infrastructure change. But even more than just those facts and figures, I'd recommend asking what are some of the more creative ways that we can approach this problem. Because if you address the challenge as, where can I go that I can maintain the most amount of benefit of where I'm producing in China? What you are going to get is the next or least worst option to producing in China. You will fundamentally be saying, I'm willing to take a poorer opportunity. If you change the conversation and you are asking, where is the next best opportunity I can achieve? Where can I find something new? Where can I achieve benefits that I hadn't even had on the table before, and take this opportunity to have that dialogue with your supplier partners? That opens up an incredible new world of opportunity. And one of the ways that partners and retailers are looking to reconsider their sourcing options is looking at how are we factoring in the United States in this policy. Now, it's no news to anyone in this room that in the 1970s we saw a very sizable concentration and contraction in the manufacturing space in the US. But up until August of this year, that trend had been reversing. And we saw a 36-month expansion in manufacturing of consumer goods in the United States. And it's hard to know exactly how those statistics are going to change with the US economy and the current position that it's in. But what is absolutely clear is that the manufacturing that is growing in the United States today looks very little like the manufacturing of the 1970s. And there's certain industries that are pursuing very aggressively a shift to having some portion of their supply chain and their production capacity in the United States, and some might say that's even out of necessity. The McKinsey team published a white paper last fall with this very striking headline of, is apparel manufacturing coming home? And the conclusion that they reached is for apparel industries to be successful in the long run, they really needed to look at the opportunities to nearshore, so producing on the continent, and with an increased amount of automation, and in a way that was sustainable. And this was for two very important reasons. One, it was to maintain and really create a new way to build profitability within their supply chain, and also in a way to be incredibly flexible and meet the demands of the consumers who are looking for additional speed and personalization in their supply chains. Now, you may not be an apparel manufacturer or retailer for that matter, but the conclusions that are outlined in the report are all around how do you partner and how do you think about more innovative solutions and completely reversing, in some cases, long-held facts and ideas on the best methods and how to approach a part of your process. And I believe that is something that pretty much everyone in this room would find some sort of benefit in when they're setting aside long-held beliefs and, again, reaching for something that provides you additional value and greater value than you are currently experiencing in your status quo. Now, some of the technologies that are opening up these opportunities in the apparel space are with companies such as Suchi, Good Clothing Company, and On Point Manufacturing. And they fundamentally shift the position of sending an order over to China, which takes weeks and months to build, ship, and transfer back to the US, and leverage something called purchase-activated manufacturing, meaning that the product is produced just as or just before the consumer goes to order it. It drastically reduces the amount of inventory, it reduces the transit time, and it fundamentally changes the profitability matrix for apparel suppliers. In the hard goods space, other organizations leverage 3D or additive manufacturing, which for single material components and products greatly reduces the production time. Again, fundamentally changes inventory costs and supply chain costs. And in tools like these, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that these organizations will be able to fundamentally expand and change the manufacturing industry overnight in the United States. You know, it'd be a generation before you see a full shift for some of these industries coming back to the United States, if that even ends up making sense for the business at all. But what I will say is this, the businesses that are partnering with the manufacturers and the other business partners that are looking at their businesses in a fundamentally different way, and they're testing some of these solutions, they're going to be able to find much more innovation in their own supply chain space. They'll have more dexterity around thinking different, but they'll also specifically be able to impact where that innovation is going. They're going to be able to find tests for viability and be able to expand or redirect their efforts much more quickly. So when and as you're thinking about what an appropriate country of production action plan would look like or another major shift within your organization, make sure you've got innovation as part of that conversation. Don't outsource, don't shift the change in technology or the opportunities that your supplier partners may be looking at as they're thinking about a different way to produce, warehouse, and ultimately produce and transport product. You may even be looking right in your own backyard in Minnesota. Now, the last thing I would leave you with to consider for a production perspective in the United States is the final benefit is again, from a trade perspective, to go back to the point I made at the start. This year, we're navigating a lot of challenges with our partnership with China. Who knows what countries of production will start to look drastically different in the coming year, and having production or at least part of your supply chain housed in the United States gives you some insulation to where that trade policy starts to go. The next disruptor I wanted to touch on isn't so much an external disruptor, it's very much an internal disruptor, and it's a different demand for transparency within the goods and in some cases services and values that an organization puts forward. Specifically, Gen Y and Gen Z, when surveyed, will tell you they want to know more about how products are sourced, produced, transported, and ultimately used. Now, it's interesting, these generations get a little bit of a rough reputation for not being especially brand or retailer loyal. But what they will tell you is that they want to know more about the businesses that they are patronizing, that they're loyal to, because what these businesses stand for is of increasing importance to these younger generations. They really see a shift from brands as labels to brands as something that they love, that's an expression of themselves. They're more value consumers, and not value as in low price, but more value as in this is an expression of my beliefs. Now, it's a pivot from the idea that brands used to tell you something about who you were. This watch I wear, the car I drive, the equipment that I use tells you something about what I've achieved in life, more of a status symbol point of view. Younger generations really think about that more as a reflection of themselves. These are brands I patronize because I want to be part of the community that this brand stands for, that the values that this brand has been able to communicate to align with my personal values, and I'll stay loyal to this community as long as that continues to be very clear. When it's not clear what the brand stands for, if there's a shift in the values, I'll shift, I'll look elsewhere also. Now, a way that suppliers can help deepen this loyalty with younger generations is to provide that transparency into how products are produced and made. And that hasn't always been the easiest thing. Supply chain transparency really made people very uncomfortable because it wasn't easy. But secondly, when you were starting to probe into your supply chain, you might uncover some unfortunate surprises. And once you uncovered them, there was an incredibly intense public reaction to that. One of the examples I remember was Kathy Lee Gifford and her intense shock And the drama that ensued when it came to light that the manufacturers that were producing her clothes for Walmart were using child labor in their supply chain. Now, I can easily believe that Kathy wasn't in charge of those decisions, but the fact that it was her name and her face on that product meant that she took a lot of the backlash on personally. And unfortunately, many other examples of this exist. A decade or so ago, the relationship between Foxconn and Apple became very public after some exposés in the New York Times and others outlined some of the unfortunate labor practices that Foxconn had in place, withholding wages and creating a really unfortunate workplace. Now, what's interesting, though, is what happens after the exposés or that the issues came to light. In Kathy's case, she initially, you may remember, tried to actually improve conditions. And she was soundly mocked by the media, by lawmakers, even by her peers. They said she had no right to play in this space. She was to take all of the blame for the issue, but no standing to fix it. And very soon, she backed away from those efforts and left that partnership and did not pursue it. Apple, on the other hand, stepped much more closely to Foxconn. They worked very proactively together to outline what their standards of practices were, how they were going to measure and report their progress. And when issues have come up, and they did just a handful of weeks ago, you may remember, out ahead of the launch of the iPhone 11, they went back to those standards and policies. They acknowledged what they had done wrong. They also were very clearly able to articulate what they were going to do going forward. Now, that makes sense from a business perspective, certainly, because there are some questions if there's laws that were being violated, but their message was also going out to their consumers as well, to tell them that no, they weren't prioritizing their own profits, their own speed ahead of the workers that were employed at the factories. They knew this was an important message that was going to land and resonate with their audience. They have started to make the shift to look at transparency in the supply chain, less about mitigating a risk and trying to hide problems or keep problems from happening, but more about a way that they could actually try and make a difference, a fundamental difference in the shift of how products were produced. They also thought about it as a way of strengthening loyalty. There's technologies that are making this increasingly easy to do. BlueMap is an example I really like. It's a tool that was developed in partnership with the National Resource Defense Council in the US and a non-governmental environmental agency within China called IPE. And what BlueMap allows is for manufacturers to independently verify and certify specific environmental results. Oh, well, that was exciting. There we go. Independent results. Retailers and brands are able to go into this marketplace and connect with their manufacturers, not only to understand their performance on these measures, but work to build action plans as appropriate to help improve performance, or also find ways to expand out their matrix and find other suppliers either in the area that are peers to that subset. The third group that can access this information is the general public. And for those consumers out there that are especially concerned about environmental practices, this is a really fantastic way to understand the brands and the retailers' commitment to environmental practices based on the results of their actual consumers, or their actual partners, excuse me. So groups, brands like Everlane have also taken this tactic, and they're very transparent with the suppliers that they work with, in addition to where the products are sourced. This is a way that you can communicate a great deal of information to the consumers that are increasingly interested in learning more. So certainly the oversight conversation with your supplier partners, or really any of the service providers that you're working with, has to be more about just the basic questions around what your practices are, what your oversight are. I would recommend that it goes more deeply into how are we aligned with our total business priorities. That's a fundamental premise of my business, is that the strongest business partnerships, much like the strongest personal partnerships, are built on shared and compatible business values. Understand how your supplier or your service partners are bringing out the mission and the vision of your organization and the values of your organization in the work that they do. Build stories around that and find ways to share those stories, because in those conversations, going deeper into your organization, whether it's the physical supply chain or even the way that your business culture and values are built, is a way to connect more deeply with younger generations who are looking to resonate and connect and have loyalty to those brands and retailers. Now, in my 18 minutes on stage, I certainly haven't covered all of the disruptors that are putting pressure on suppliers and retailers today, but I did want to talk about two that I think are incredibly important. Because I think navigating these two disruptors in a way that is building closer partnerships is a blueprint for how you could navigate other disruptors that come to you in the way that retail is changing today. The strongest partners I see are the ones that consistently show up in 3 ways. First of all, they're incredibly strategic. These are the partners that are going to tell you that what is most important to their organization, their strategic plan for addressing it, how they're going to measure their performance, and they're going to be able to come back to you and tell you exactly how they are delivering on the organizational priorities that they have. These are also the groups that are going to be very creative. They'll be testing new technologies, even if they aren't fully market viable yet, because they know they have something to learn. You'll see them across a variety of channels, working with a variety of other partners and clients, and those learnings are things that they're going to be able to come back to you with and help you inform and elevate your business and your own strategies. Lastly, the suppliers that really set themselves apart as true innovative partners are the ones that know they don't have all of the answers. They're looking outside of their own walls, they're looking outside of their own industries, outside of their own countries, and they're asking a lot of questions. And again, they are going to be the ones that come back to you with the most different perspectives, and they're going to be most excited to share because they know that your growth is also key to their growth. And they want to ensure that they're doing that in the most viable way possible. Yeah, I'm really excited to be done, but I've got 10 seconds. And in these 10 seconds, what I will share with you is that no one knows exactly where the future of retail is going to be. Disruption is the new steady state. But what I can tell you is that the future is going to look a lot like, is going to be heavily tied to relationships. So whether it's relationships with your consumer, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that later today, or it's relationships with your supplier. And deepening those relationships and understanding how you can proactively and with excitement pursue the changes in the retail space is a way that you are going to be able to set yourself apart. Not fear-based, not risk-based, but with excitement and innovation, you'll be able to handle whatever retail throws at you. So with that, I will thank you. And no, I don't have time for questions.